During this session, we invite you to ask our panelists questions at any time. The panelists will answer these questions after the main discussion. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions to the panelists. To share your comments with all participants, you are welcome to use the chat box. Keep in mind that this is a public discussion, so please be courteous and remain on topic. Please only click on links shared by participants you trust. I now hand over to Dr. Fred Carden, Chair of the PEP Board of Directors, who is our moderator for the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Chantal. Appreciate that. What a wonderful survey of what PEP has accomplished to date, and also some of the behind the scenes of how PEP actually got to where it is today and where we see it continuing for many years to come. So as Chantal said, this session is really about the future and what comes next and what can PEP be actually doing going forward. But just to set the context before I introduce the panel, there's a group of PEP researchers who recently published a paper in Economic Letters where they asked the question, what's the representation of researchers in the Global South in development research? And while you've heard a lot about accomplishments that have really been fantastic accomplishments, this paper really shows that much remains to be done. They looked, for example, at conferences and found that all of the leading development economic conferences are taking place in the Global North, with the exception of the African Development Bank's conference. And when they looked at who participated in those conferences, on average, 9% of the participants were from universities in the Global South and 57% from researchers in the Global Northern universities. And when they looked at journals, they found about what they identified as the leading economic journals, they found 16% of the articles by researchers in the Global South. So lots remains to be done, and that's really what we wanted to focus on here today through a series of questions. But before I do that, I wanted to introduce the panel and ask them all to turn their videos on. And the first one I'll introduce, you've already heard his name, Mustapha Nabli, founding chair of the board of PEP, and a lifetime of work in economic policy in Tunisia as well. Second, we have Arjan de Haan from the International Development Research Center. Arjan has been a promoter, cheerleader, friendly critic, and very good friend of PEP for many years at IDRC and is much appreciated. Next, we have Chris Chibwana, who has recently joined as the representative to PEP at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Great to have you on board as well, and look forward to your comments. And finally, and in some ways most importantly, because she lives the challenges of getting research out there in the Global South, is Lucia Kassouf, who's a professor at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Anna started as a PEP fellow with PEP, as a PEP grant recipient, became a fellow, and is now a representative of the fellows to the PEP corporate membership group, which is really the highest governing body of PEP. So welcome to you as well. We have three questions that we're going to address, and I'll focus the first part of the discussion on the people who might be the most directly thinking about those questions, but also invite the other panelists to contribute. So I'll ask that people keep their interventions relatively short because we have 3 questions and 4 people, and we do want to leave time to respond to some of the questions that people put forward. So the 3 questions that we have talked about a little bit are, what are the obstacles to Southern-driven development? And what are some potential innovative solutions? And this is a more broad question. And the next 2 questions will get down to what can actually be done and what can funders do, and then what can PEP itself actually be doing to promote more and more engagement and participation and profile to researchers in the Global South. So I'm going to start with the first question, and I think I'll start with Arjan Kassouf and then go to Mustapha. So if you could, Anna, begin with giving us some reflections on the challenges that you face, please.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, PEP, for inviting me to participate to this very important debate. I think we can divide the obstacles that certain researchers face in two sides, the supply side and the demand side. The supply side, I mean, all the obstacles that reduce the quality of research. What would be that? Networking, it's very difficult for us to visit other countries sometimes or to study abroad. Funding that would allow us to go to conferences, to have some contact with the mainstream of knowledge. Many technologies that are available in developed countries that is very difficult for us. Lack of human capital sometimes, lack of infrastructures. So all of this language is a very important barriers. English language is very important. So all these factors reduce the quality of research in developing countries. On the other hand, we have this demand side. The demand side, I would say, is that referees and journal editors sometimes underestimate the value of local knowledge. And we have in this research you mentioned, we saw that there are many desk rejections from certain researchers when they submit a paper. One of them is because of plagiarism, and it's known that the language is very important, that sometimes the person doesn't know how to rephrase and then go to have these problems. Also because of local research that they think is not very important. So this is another very interesting point that we should focus, and many people don't even remember or don't give attention. There is a very new research paper came out with my colleague, done by my colleague. She showed that in top development journals, looking at the website, she found 439 editors, only 17% were from southern countries. And so these journals are studying our problems, the developing country problems, and most of them that participate are from northern countries that sometimes don't have knowledge that are very important to solve problems and influence policy. Let me stop here, otherwise other people don't have time. Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you, Mustapha. You have a lifetime of experience in this area. What are your reflections?
Thank you, Fred, and thanks to PEP for organizing this event. And let me start by congratulating PEP for this 20-year event, 20 years of a great job done to develop Southern-driven development. Fred, I think I'm not going to answer your questions.
No surprise.
I am going to answer it indirectly because I'm going to dream. I'm going to dream with you because my age allows me to do that.
Excellent.
I think I'd like to make in this view about promoting Southern-driven development, looking forward over the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I think I'd like to make two points or two messages. One, the first is that we need to be moving from catch-up to frontier research. Over the last 30 years or more, or support to capacity building and research in southern countries, it has been mostly oriented towards allowing researchers in these countries to catch up to best practices and to best research methods available worldwide. This has led to focus on existing research methodologies and approaches to policy issues, and on mastering these techniques and methodologies. I think this has been the main thrust of what has been done in this area. Now, as we look forward in the future, I think the next stage of Southern-driven development is to go towards the frontier of research. It's not playing catch-up anymore. I think we need the next 20 years or 30 years to see Southern researchers playing at the frontier of research. And why do I say that? I say that because I think there has been a few trends globally which impose this, which push us towards that. It's not a choice. I think it's a necessity. I think I would like to mention three major trends. The first trend has been the increasing and greater questioning of economics and the effectiveness of its approaches. So just looking at standard old methodologies does not do it anymore. This trend has started with the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. It has been strengthened, gained strength with the COVID-19 pandemic. And economics has been too much associated with neoliberal economics and has been increasingly questioned. Economists in southern countries need to face to that challenge. The second trend, I think, globally that has been taking place is that there has been two major global subjects that have taken center stage, which are not global, inequality in general within country, as well as globally, but within quantity of country, as well as the global climate crisis. And these two areas, they have turned out to be really very difficult to deal with within the standard economics approaches. Economics has not been of much use, of help in dealing with the climate crisis, and has not been of much use in dealing with increased inequality. This means that a new political equilibria and questioning of social contracts are really increasingly the major game in town in the political domain. The third trend that we have been observing recently, and it's less known, is the trend towards merging of development economics and just economics. I think the economics that we used to think is appropriate for advanced countries, and we thought that there is a different economics, which is development economics, which is appropriate for developing countries. I think that distinction is almost gone in my mind. I think the insights that we gain from development economics today are very much in use or helpful for advanced countries in many areas, and vice versa. So there is an increasing convergence of economics to deal with the global issues, whether it is in advanced or developing countries, because of the many issues of imperfection and so on that have to deal with those issues. So this means that really, as we look forward in the next 20 years or 30 years, researchers in developing countries need to move to face to these issues and to be players in dealing with these issues as we go forward. Now, the second point is, what are the issues, the main issues looking forward? What are the main topics that we should be facing and looking for? I think to be very quick, I mentioned three. At the broadest level, I think the major problem that we're facing in developing countries as we go forward is really indeed the need for citizens of developing countries to increase their standards of living is something that we take for granted. Developing countries have, need to increase standards of living, and therefore they need to claim more resources, energy, food, and other resources. But at the same time, as we are trying to do this, we know that the constraints on the ability of Mother Earth to provide these resources is under a lot of stress. So how can we think of development economics in this context, in this constraint, the new world of constraints on resources? I think we tend to ignore this in development economics today. It's like climate change is an issue for advanced countries, but it's not. It's an issue for us as well. Sorry. I may be getting COVID-19, so don't worry. The second topic, which is linked to what I said earlier, which is it is increasingly recognized that market economics, which has been associated with neoliberal economics, cannot do the job anymore. We cannot depend on market economics and liberal economics to deal with the issues of the world today. As mentioned, because of climate change, inequality, technological change, and so on. So we need solutions which combine market, state, and civil and society in general, civil society in general, combinations of solutions. And this requires a lot of new kind of research and kind of work that needs to take place. And developing countries has an advantage taking this track and following this track going forward. Finally, the last issue that I think is really of highest importance is technology. As we look forward in the next few decades, technology is going to be driving a lot of happening. Technology now, it is information, digital technology is spreading now, but biotechnology is coming up very soon, and it will be paying a lot of. So lots of new issues are coming up. And how can we harness technology for the benefit of mankind? It's not so clear cut. So that we respect humanity, our rights, our privacies, our freedoms, how we ensure equitable societies, and how allow everyone to have a meaningful life of work and leisure. These issues are going to be central to our future. And I think developing countries, researchers need to be working on those issues forward. It is not enough anymore. My last word is not anymore enough to fiddle around with a small, technical model. The issues that we face now are much bigger, are much more challenging, and I think researchers in southern countries need to move forward and take the stage. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mustapha. I think you've touched on the whole set of questions that we have and presented some really interesting challenges. And I'd like to turn to the funders at this point, because you've heard some very concrete issues. You've heard some very big challenges that are proposed for researchers in the Global South. And I wonder, Chris, if you would start us off with some reflections on what you've heard, but what also you think the role of donors can be in actually moving forward. And then I'll go to Arjan.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Fred. And I'll say my internet is very unstable, so if I freeze,
okay,
you can move to the next panelist. But yeah, really, I think I agree with the sentiments that have been shared in terms of what the obstacles are to southern-driven development. I do think we should face it. Power asymmetries are a big issue. The people that have money are not often from the Global South. It's northern governments, northern foundations, northern multilaterals. They're the ones that are defining the rules for development and defining what questions get asked, setting the agenda, determining who conducts those investigations. And it's sad that governments in the Global South don't always invest in research, and in part because they don't have the resources to do so, or because they've not seen the returns to funding research.
Okay, I think Chris is frozen. So Arjan, let me turn to you and see if we get him back soon.
Thanks. Can you hear me, Fred?
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Really, I hope Chris will come back, because I am really keen to hear his take on the power power asymmetries. First of all, thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks for a great. Chris, do you want to continue?
Sure, very quickly. Yeah, so I think, I mean, what we see, I don't know where you stopped hearing me, but really we see inequities in opportunities and funding. And this really remains a critical issue that's putting researchers and institutions in the global south at the mercy of high-income country funders, high-income countries contractors, and high-income country principal investigators. And so one of the reasons for the difficulty in shifting this inequity is the level at which the decision-making process is open to researchers and other collaborators from low and middle-income countries. The current systems that we have, they continue to regard low LMIC collaborators basically as passive recipients or as data collectors with very little representation and voice at that decision-making level. And so by the time that LMIC partners are brought into decision-making, the priority areas for research are already determined, the funds are already divided, the research questions have already been developed, and the strategy has already been set. And so that really makes it very difficult for researchers from the global south to take an active role and shape the agenda around research and investigation. Now, I think funders like the Hewlett Foundation, where I work, have a role to try and change this. I think what I often hear is that within the funder ecosystem is that there's weak capacity, both research and organizational, within the global south. Now, we all know that that's not true at all because we have an abundance of research capacity. I think we've heard from the presentations today that there's a plethora of research capacity. I think part of the challenge is that we sometimes struggle to tell our stories much better, or perhaps we're too humble to tell our stories because culturally we're not accustomed to speaking about ourselves. And so I think for an organization like PEP, and I know that they're doing great work in communicating the work that PEP affiliates and others are doing, amplifying the voices of local researchers. I know PEP does this already, but there's always potential to do more of that. And I think the objective is to highlight the excellent work that Southern researchers are doing and how relevant and impactful that work is. I think we saw from the presentation earlier that 54% of research that was conducted informed decisions. That's impact. I think we need to be able to amplify those stories and to tell those stories a little bit more, a little bit better. And I guess I'll find out, just as a funder and someone who's also from the global south, I would like to see researchers really bring their authenticity, their experiences, their background, their proximity to the work, and the variety of influences that inform their ideas into the spaces in which they engage. So basically turning into strengths, things that have traditionally been used to make us feel like imposters. For instance, being a person of color, being a local, being locally trained, or not having English as a first language. Those are strengths. And so we need to bring those out and celebrate those in engaging with funders, because sitting as a funder, that's really attractive because I see those not as weaknesses, but actually as opportunities. And then I think finally, just like we need to refocus our attention to the local needs, the local priorities, the local communities, and the local decision makers, so that we're more responsive to those than we are to external requests for proposals in our choice of focus. I think PEP and its affiliates need to speak out more against parachute research, really, and demand greater control of funding, as well as greater control of research output and the publication, so that local researchers actually are the first authors on articles, not the last author on those articles. So I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Chris. So Arjan, I'll go to you, and I'd really like to hear you talk a bit about the role that the funders can play. I mean, my own experience, and I think Hewlett's a little bit of an exception in this, is that they tend to be very risk averse. And that causes a lot of pullback and focus on the people you already know. So how can funders actually begin to get past that and really begin to do some of the things Chris raised about actually starting from the agenda that Southern researchers have?
Thanks very much, Fred. I'm with Mustapha. Well, I'm not going to say I'm not going to answer that question, but it's like I can't answer that question fully, and I'm sure you appreciate that. First, thanks for my fellow panelists for that, Chris. You know, your emphasis on power symmetries, and I've never heard the word authenticity in a forum like that. So thank you for bringing that up, and I think we should really build on that. I also want to, you know. I came here, and I listened to the testimonies and so on. Like, yeah, I'm just here to congratulate PEP. The work you've done is fantastic. And if we come to the question, what PEP should do, keep doing what you're doing. This is absolutely fantastic. I always think about this as like, I think it's an Alice in Wonderland. It's like you have to run faster to stand still. The global knowledge network is not standing still, and my feeling is that Southern researchers are always catching up with that. And if you look at the trends that the research by Anna and others have shown, is that's exactly what it shows, right? It's like enormously hard work, and there is no change in the proportion of Southern researchers' representation in the global debates, right? And the reason that it's stagnant is because of your hard work, and I just want to congratulate you on that. It's not enough, but it's not because of the work that you do to keep up with that. Is a fantastic achievement. I think of let me put it in separated into two questions, Fred. In two parts of my answer, rather. The first thing, I think it's important to think about when the question that you put up first, for me, is that's too big a question, if you like, because the question of the position of research is like the development question more broadly, right? And I think it's when I think about development successes, and I know there's not one story to tell about this. It's like, if you think about the successes of past development of, say, Nordic countries, right? There was a strategy of bringing research or evidence into those successes, and particularly ways of investment, right? If you think about Finland, that is a fairly recent development success, as in 150 years ago is what I call recent. It's like, you know, research, evidence, knowledge, investing in capacities was absolutely essential to that. Even the US, there's a case to that. It is an elite type of investment, but there's a conscious investment in elite universities that produce those results, right? And it's integral to the development model, if you like. And China, of course, has done exactly the same, right? It has a nation building over the last 30-40 years, a nation building emphasis, and evidence is absolutely key to that. So the reason I'm saying this is I don't think you can separate the question about the positioning of research without the development research, the development models more. I think that's important for where I see donors coming in. The resources for development research are finite. We're always worried that they become more finite, and certainly that donors can dedicate to locally generated research always seem to shrink, and they don't really shrink. But again, that's because of the hard work of people advocating for this, right? And I think we just quite simply need to continue to do that. And having worked in different development agencies, that is what we do, right? We constantly, you know, I won't say we push against the power asymmetries, but we push against the quick fix that say ministers in development agencies are looking for, right? And you know, I worked in Claire Short's department, and you know, when Claire Short looked for good research, you know, I fully supported her, and she needed that good research because what? Because she needed to justify the investment in development more generally, which in Europe, in the UK, wherever is constantly under pressure, right? So I'm fully aware of the pressure that people face, and how that then leads to certain investment. I'm not justifying it, but as a political driver behind it. The crux to the next steps, if you like, is very much continuing that advocacy. We need to continue the work that we're doing, but at the same time, think about the broader context of development successes, and that is always around nations, countries, local groups, and so on, taking charge of that development, right? And that is the key to development research as well. This, as long as it continues to be funded by the global north, right? But we'll continue to do what we're doing, right? And we'll continue to advocate that. But as long as that is driven by those northern by the northern support, it won't be enough to succeed. It really needs to, the demand for research and the funding for research needs to become part of kind of the development projects and led by the drivers in the global south in those contexts. I want to come back later perhaps to what perhaps PEP can do more about that, but maybe stop at this point. Fred, back to you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to turn back to Anna. You've heard a lot of comments, a lot of very wide-ranging issues from the donors, from the vision that Mustapha has shared. And I wonder if you have any reflections as a researcher, how you'd like to see the donors respond and how you see the issues that Mustapha has raised from your perspective.
See, Fred, I think PEP is doing a great job. Mm-hmm. And what we are doing now is a movement. I am sure that if we talk with scholars from the North, they would think it's normal to have all the conferences in northern countries, most of the papers published by northern researchers and editors from northern countries, funding places, centers in northern countries. So what we're doing now is, I think, is starting to show that this is not really correct, or we should change. I'm not going to say it's wrong, but it's time to change. And as Mustapha said, I completely agree. I think with COVID-19 was very clear that if we have this inequality, the whole world will suffer. We see that many diseases are appearing now, and we cannot leave poor countries alone, doing whatever they have to do to solve the problem, because this is not going to happen. And the consequences come for everyone. So climate change is another point. We see a lot going on. Government in countries that are completely crazy people, and the consequences are not only for the country, but the whole world. And so it's time to do something. It's time to change. And I think PEP is in the right track. I think the funders are helping a lot, but unfortunately we're just starting, and it's a difficult time that we need financing, we need networking, we need collaboration, we need funders contacting the universities in other countries, contacting the Institute for collecting data, and trying to help even more that they are doing now. Thank you.
Thanks. And do you think that the main topics that Mustapha put forward, which is how to increase the standard of living in face of the constraints of the earth, how do we think about getting away from neoliberal economics and combining the market, the state, and society as a whole? And his third point was really around the role and importance of technology. Are these areas where PEP could and should actually begin to focus some of their efforts? And then we can move to some comments on what PEP should be doing from others as well.
Yes, technology is really important because it's completely different than 20 years ago, and 20 years ago is nothing. And it's going to be even worse in the future, worse than saying it's going to change really fast from now on, faster. And we have to do something to include developing countries and scholars I think PEP is doing a good job, and I understand it could improve if we make people aware of the problem and help university centers. One big problem is brain drain. You know, we have these scarce human resources, very expensive human capital that we lose because they want to have better opportunities and they move to developed countries. How to keep those scarce resources in poor countries, how to improve technology, cables, optic fibers, and computers, so people have the tools to work and have a better research and help policy improvement. How to improve education. I think that's the main point. I'm not talking about the university, I'm talking about basic education. This is key. How can we make people aware in general in poor countries that studying is the most important thing? Studying help health, help nutrition, help technology, help policy, everything. And I think that's the main goal that we need to tackle and ask for help from the funders and from PEP.
Thanks very much, Anna.
Thank you, Fred.
Mustapha, I wanted to come back to you. You've been listening to a lot of comments since you made your opening remarks and put forward some really big challenges. How do you think PEP should begin to move in those directions? What should it actually be doing concretely to move forward? And then I'll turn back to Chris and Arjan on that point.
That's a tough one, Fred.
That's why I gave it to you.
Yes. I think it's what I'm talking about is not something that can be done overnight. It's really it should be part of a vision. I think this requires PEP. I think we have started to do that some time ago. I don't know where it is at. I think in the vision of PEP, I think something of that nature should be included explicitly and developed explicitly. And once you have that set in your vision, you need how do you want to be in 20 years? What do you want to be in 30 years? Once you do that, I think you can work out the implications now. So, for instance, you can work out the idea that you want to focus on technology or something like that. That's going to be one of the main themes. Or you want to work on climate change, or you want to work on inequality as such. So you want to make one of these major themes as your central theme. It's not anymore trade and or this or agriculture or this or that, but you want to have something broader that is really shaping your overall research agenda. And by doing that, and by defining the scope and the challenge that you face, I think you will be bringing up the best of developing countries, researchers, because when you pose a challenge to them, they will try to meet the challenge. So PEP needs to be putting challenges to the development research community. I think challenging them and putting issues to them and through all kinds of instruments should be one way to do it. And go beyond, if you like, what I mean is go beyond the standard way of, we have a research question and then we look at what is the best techniques and what are the approaches, and then we try to find. I think we should, at least some work should start to be moving into that direction, to more broader issues, to more broader challenges that face. And it will take time. It will take time, but I think that's the way to start pulling this into your agenda. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mustapha. I'll go to Chris and then Arjan, and we can leave some time for questions or comments. I haven't seen any yet in the chat or in the Q&A, but if there are some, please by all means post them. I don't think you can actually speak. Chris.
Yeah, so I think in terms of what PEP should do, and I think PEP is doing this already. I'll mention two things. One is that there's definitely a strength in numbers. And I think PEP is a member of several regional networks, networks of organizations within the Global South that are doing similar work. And I think PEP can be a leader in that space. And I think it is a leader in that space. Like we've seen all the experience over the years, 20 years of PEP, and then the work that PEP has done during that time that could benefit other organizations in the Global South. And I think the goal there is to strengthen the entire ecosystem. So can we have multiple organizations that are as good and strong as PEP is? And can PEP use the resources, the expertise, the experiences that they've developed over the 20 years to try and strengthen others so that the pie is larger and there are more strong organizations that are advising governments to do this. I think the second thing that I'll mention is just really prioritizing government engagement. I think it was great to see the numbers about keep going back to 54% of, I think 56% of research informing decisions. That's huge. That's a lot. And so I think that's the sweet spot. That's the comparative advantage that PEP and its affiliates have, is they are from these countries. They have connections with the minister, with the permanent secretary in the ministry. I think that's a strength. And so if members continue to prioritize that, they'll essentially occupy space. In a way, you become gatekeepers because you own the relationships. And so anybody that comes in will have to work through you. And you have a lot more bargaining power to say, look, we will define the agenda. We already defined the agenda with the government. And so if you're coming to support us, this is what you're going to support. The funding will follow. So I guess instead of primarily chasing requests for proposals, responding to those, focus on what you're very good at, which is you have strong relationships. You can strengthen those. You know what's happening within countries. And you can begin to formulate questions that others can come in to support. So yeah, I think it's flipping that. Instead of going to look for funding first, focus on the relationships with governments within the region. So those two things. Back to you, Fred.
Thanks. Arjan. And then, sorry, just before you start, I do want to go to Jane briefly on one of the comments from Judith Collum in the chat. Because she's asking about what PEP is doing in terms of decolonization, in terms of research methods, but she's also asking if the funding partners recognize that there's a need to decolonize both research and methodologies and documentation. So you may want to touch on that as well.
Did you want me to go first or Jane?
I want you to go to first and then I'll go to Jane.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think my responses are, I think it's underlining, I had about three things that came to mind. I think all the panelists mentioned one of them. So there's perhaps nothing new. I think the idea of a movement is absolutely important, right? And funding movements, funding is very tricky, right? We're here to support the movement and try to support it through our funding. But the important thing is, of course, the movement. And I won't go into the decolonization question, but that's how that needs to happen, right? That needs to, that's not something that funders can try to support that, but that needs to come from the, I'm not sure what the right expression is, but needs to come from those movements. For me, that's quite clear, and we look how to support that. So the question for PEP then, and this is very much, I think Chris, you made that point, right? I think it's so important to do that with other similar organizations, right? As people work in the same space, there's always kind of a competition for resources, but that movement needs to be jointly, and again then call on funders to support that, right, and help us find ways to support that in the ways that is needed for those purposes. So the question for PEP with those organizations is really comes back to how can we make that the research that is supported more locally led in the way that I spoke about earlier. It is about development. It's not just about research. It's about development being locally led. So it's part of that broader question. For me, that's not about the themes. All the themes that Abby mentions are the right themes, but it's really how in a particular context that same theme is articulated, right? I mean, climate is a very clear example, right? The global funding tends to focus on mitigation. In the global south, local communities need more money for adaptation, so we need to continue to shift that. And in the end, maybe those concepts that are thought of in the north aren't relevant for local communities. The point is, you know, it is so important to articulate that from that specific perspective. So the two specific things I have in mind, and like I said, the others have mentioned this before. One, bolder about the successes. When I was introduced as a friendly critic, I think 90% of that has always been be bolder about the successes there, because we need those, because the work deserves it, first of all, and secondly, we need those stories to promote the case for funding. And there's so much good stuff in there. It's really nicely presented earlier on, and so much progress. And just we're here to help you do more for that. And secondly, the create, you're already, the research, the 50 plus cases are already clearly showing that, and the cases that didn't succeed, we're trying it as well, right? Just the fact that they didn't achieve it doesn't mean the research project wasn't successful. It's the orientation of PEP to always, and the way you embed that in your granting system is really cutting edge. Maybe there's ways of pushing that a little bit further by focusing on the creation of that demand, if you like, building on the successes where the PEP research did have PEP funded research had that success. Is think through is like how can we push that a little further? You have great cases, for example, of the young research that were asked back by policymakers for another problem, which I think is like one of the critical successes, right? And build on that to move this towards, you know, making the case of, in the end, it's those local policy makers that, or communities, stakeholders that need to drive the questions and engage with the researchers. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jane, do you have want to say a minute or so on Judith's question?
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
It's fine.
Okay, today is when I've learned that people can refuse to answer questions, but let me not refuse, let me answer it in this way. You are talking about decolonizing both research methodologies and documentation. Yes, I think Arjan has already partly answered that. I believe that we do recognize this, that it's something we are addressing to the best of our ability, given funding constraints, because everything that we do, and it's not just in Africa, in the whole global south, also depends on resources. So I look at it in the two aspects in terms of methodologies. In PEP, we've developed cutting edge approaches. And the whole purpose of mentorship, the very intensive mentorship, is to ensure that our researchers, even the very low level researchers, we train them on these approaches, and we ensure that they can actually apply the approaches and eventually be able to transfer that knowledge to even other researchers in the generation. So I think in terms of methodologies, that is what I'll talk about. And traditionally, over those almost 20 years, we've focused on 4 approaches. We have one which we've now taken a break maybe comes lower to the level of the ground level, the community-based monitoring system. We have our micro analysis, non-experimental impact evaluation. We have the impact evaluation group, and then we have micro policy modeling. When we come to documentation, again, I'm not sure that we can think of an institution that is trying to do this as best as we are doing. And I emphasized a lot when I was picking up on the lessons on maybe the milestones that Carol emphasized the milestones. I talked more of the lessons, but really the engagement, the documentation that we do, the videos that are produced by our comms people, the training that we do, or the training of our researchers on communication. Actually, most of the activities that we've had over the last 3 weeks, it was more to train our researchers how they are going to communicate that knowledge to the next level. And then, of course, the dissemination workshops, not just PEP-wide dissemination, but supporting them to disseminate at the local level and also at the international level. I believe that there's first the documentation and then sharing of that information. Judith, I would say that we can take the conversation further because but there are also other people who are looking more directly into these issues within PEP. But yes, we do recognize, but funding is always a constraint as to how much of this we can do. Thank you, Fred. I hope I've responded to the question.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the question, Judith. Stephen Yeo had a question. The implication of some of these contributions is that PEP should diversify from capacity building to more active engagement in influencing policy. And is this the direction that PEP should move? And I think certainly the comments and challenges that Mustapha has put forward say absolutely we should move in that direction, and PEP is already making certain moves in that direction already through some of the research that it's focusing on, which is not strictly capacity building, but is actually beginning to use the skills of the researchers that PEP is working with. Are there any other comments that panel members would like to make on that?
Yeah, I think I can comment on Stephen's question. I think when we think about capacity, and when I'm speaking for the Hewlett Foundation, we think about capacity for a purpose. So it's not just capacitating people for the sake of capacitating them. It's so they can help governments make better decisions and that ultimately improve lives. And so I think these are steps along the same causal chain, as it were, along the same theory of change, that PEP capacitates researchers. Researchers do excellent research, they engage governments, and that research gets used to improve people's lives. So they're not mutually exclusive at all.
Just one comment, Fred.
Please.
I cannot finish this discussion without making one comment on financing. I think as we look forward in the next 20, 30 years, I think this old model of northern finance and southern users of the researchers users has got to evolve. It cannot continue that way. And we know that there are market failures in terms of funding research as a whole. And financing from the South tends to be difficult. But let me say that as we go forward in the next decade or two, I think the possibilities of financing from the South, from within the South, should become much more important. I think we should look very much for partnerships between North and South in funding research in the South. It cannot be South only. I think it's too early, but maybe in 50 years' time we can do that. But in the next 20 years or 30 years, it has got to be more like a partnership type between Northern financing institutions and Southern, because there is a lot of money out there in the South now these days. It's not like 30 years ago. There's a lot of money out there in the private sector as well as in the government sector in many countries. And there is potential for doing partnerships and mobilizing funding from the South And I think this should help in moving the direction of the nature of the research and the direction of the research as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Before I turn to the others for the last things you want to say, because we only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, I just wanted to mention that Sarmita Flores posted a comment that there's a challenge that we have to confront in some countries. They're talking about Central and South America, where universities are working in more authoritarian systems, and figuring out the challenges of how to face that is an important point to keep in mind. And Bernard de Calouet makes the point that research capacity is a long process. It takes 20 years working on the same topics with similar methodologies to become an expert. And I think that's something PEP has been doing already for 20 years. So there are already some people who are quite expert in the methodologies within the PEP network, but more is certainly needed on that front. I want to turn to Arjan and then Chris and then Anna for a last word on things you want to make sure get said before we close.
Sure, I can start. Yeah. So I think from a funder's perspective, there's I guess 2 things that we can do. I think a lot of questions have been around funding. I think there's definitely a need for funders like ourselves and IDRC and others to continue to fund work that strengthens the Southern knowledge ecosystem, both at the individual but also the institutional level. And I think Hewlett has historically been an example in supporting field building activities. I think starting with our collaboration with IDRC and others in the Think Tank initiative, which I think did amazing work to strengthen the capacities of participating think tanks. So I think that there's definitely a need to build on that work to strengthen the field, because stronger institutions, stronger individuals mean that the quality of research will be better. Governments will be informed with good evidence, and those decisions will be better, and that will be better for everybody for development. Now, I understand that capacity building is not attractive to a lot of funders compared to buying quick results, quick wins. But if we're going to sustainably shift power in global knowledge production, I think we must be willing to make the investments that will address the underlying systemic issues that limit participation by Southern researchers in development. The second thing that I'll mention, which I think funders can do, is to advocate for a shift in funding practices. Now, I think Fred, you mentioned here is probably the exception in that regard, in how flexible we are. But I think there are so many capable knowledge organizations in the global South for funders to pick and support. It all boils down to trust. We must be willing to trust Southern knowledge organizations, or else we'll keep directing our funding to the same Northern organizations that have traditionally received funding, and therefore will continue to further advance and expand the inequities in global knowledge production. So I wanted to mention those 2 things.
Thanks, Chris. Arjan.
Thanks very much. Not really a lot to add. You know, as a funder, looking at the trends at ODA at this point of time, as Chris rightly said, and in those times of crisis, capacity building is even less popular than before. We need the strongest possible arguments for doing what we're doing, right? So I do want to underline the point about being bolder about successes and the point about the movement, right? And including on decolonization, right? These needs to, it's going to sound a little bit odd, but we need to be educated what it needs to look like. That we are a crown corporation that has existed for 50 years, right? We're a crown corporation existed for 50 years. I think we've evolved, but the institutions are still there. So we need to work together to continuously change those practices. But I don't want to end on a pessimistic note, right? That's the work we have to do. I just want to go back to, you know, this has been 20 years of phenomenal work. I'm so happy to see that, you know, the people that started this in this meeting, that continued commitment, this beautiful testimonies about how did support help people, change their career, if not more, and that's all through your hard work. And I just want to celebrate that and say, we're here for the next 20 years. Thanks very much, Frank.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'll go to you for the last word and coming back to your movement.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good, important movement we are here doing now. And
Right.
I think one point is technology. For technology improvement, we need more private sector involvement. Probably the funders get government and private sector, because this is huge and we need improvements. Climate change. We also, I know PEP has a very, as Chris mentioned, very nice way of influencing policy and in contact with government, but that's a very crucial point in improving climate change and help the world. I think a very direct link that exists a little bit today, but it's not direct. It's like to have PEP and the funders connected directly to a university to, for example, promote events, invite students to have participate in conferences or visiting a center and taking classes and doing research and so on. I think this would be important. Say, I don't know, the best student would get a scholarship every year, something like that. And that's it. I think data collection as well. We have very good institutes. Sometimes they don't have money for collecting data. And as they mentioned, we in South America and Central America, we are in trouble with our government now. And so it's a difficult time that need help.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'm not going to try to summarize. This is an ongoing conversation. It's an open conversation. So if any of you in the audience or in the panel have other comments or reactions, PEP would welcome receiving those. I'm sure we're going to have to listen to this more than once to think through the suggestions, implications, and possibilities. So what I'd like to do now is just thank the panelists very, very much for some very thoughtful and thought-provoking comments and suggestions for PEP. So thank you very much. And I'll turn back to, I guess, to Marjorie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was the last session of our event. So I really appreciate everybody's comments, insights. That was a very interesting discussion. So I want to thank all participants as well for being with us today. And we hope you enjoyed the event, and we hope you continue to follow us and participate in our coming events. There will be more of these discussions happening throughout the year. So thank you very much. Maybe Jane, you want to say a few words?
No, also just to thank everyone for attending. We are very proud to be celebrating 20 years. And as we indicated earlier, we'll be producing a series of documentation, the same documentation Judith asked about, as we celebrate over the next 3 months up to October, when we actually clock 20 years. But just to say that we appreciate all of you. You've been a part of this journey with us, and look forward to working with you the next 20 years together in different capacities. Thank you. And of course, we'll be publishing the proceedings of this symposium. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, technical team. Bye-bye, yes, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, the interpreters as well. Very good job. Thank you. I believe we now can close the session.
Maybe you save the chat in case there are any comments that we didn't respond to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you.
You'll capture those. You'll capture the chat and the Q&A.
Yes, all of that is
Okay.
recorded. Yes.
Great. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.